Hi everyone, this is Ellen from Astrology Journal. I want to talk about the chart for Mercury Retrograde. It turned retrograde on July 18th at 12:44 in the morning, Eastern Daylight Time. I'm recording this on July 18th in the evening, and I will probably have it out tomorrow, July 19th. So normally I don't talk about Mercury Retrograde because it happens frequently. It happens 3 times a year, so it's not really that notable. However, this year I feel like Mercury is a really important player. So the first eclipse of the year was in Virgo, and the last eclipse of the year is also going to be in Virgo, and Virgo is ruled by Mercury. And then I also, when I looked at the energy for the year, I saw a lot of inconjunct energy, and the inconjunct is 150 degrees. And when you map that out on the wheel, you get here to 0 degrees of Virgo. And again, Virgo is ruled by Mercury. And then this month, this Mercury retrograde happening in July seems pretty significant because we had Neptune turning retrograde, Saturn turning retrograde, and Uranus entering Gemini. So 3 significant events happening in this month, and Mercury turning retrograde in this month. So it feels important to me to look at this chart, and so that's why I want to do it. When I was looking at the symbolism earlier today, there were a couple of themes that came through, so I want to talk about those, and then I want to look at the Sabian symbols and see what else comes through. Or I'm sorry, I want to look at the symbolism more closely and see if anything else comes through. So the first theme was the idea of the dying of the heroic age. And this has been a theme that I've been aware of for a couple years now, I'd say. My time sense isn't the greatest, but I'd say it started about a couple years ago. So I've lived in a city, some city or another, my entire adult life. So I'm used to sirens. They're just background noise. I know they're there, but I don't really tune in or tune them in or tune them out. They're just there. But a couple years ago, I went through a period where I was just hearing sirens, and like this, it was just causing this deep aching yearning for it to stop. And it wasn't for that siren in that moment so much to stop. It was more the idea of, could we please, this pattern, this cycle we're in of the need for, of the crisis and the victimization and the need for heroes. It was like that could this whole pattern please stop? And the pattern is the idea of Saturn and Capricorn, and structure and condition, and sort of what we've created, the structure we've created. So what was coming through for me wasn't the idea of disparagement or belittlement of people fulfilling the heroic roles or the victim roles for that matter. So I want to make that clear. That's not what I'm saying. What was coming through was the idea of, we've created this structure that requires us to require structure. All of that is Saturn, and we'll look at that, and it's relevant in this chart. And it requires us to fulfill those roles on either side. And it just felt like, for me, I guess I reached a point where I was tired of it. I didn't want that anymore. And I will just say, for context, I related to the heroic when I was a kid. I identified with the heroic. I watched all those superhero, cartoons when I was a kid, and I did not relate to the victim being saved. I related to the hero doing the saving. And I would say, as an athlete, in my own mind, in my own perceptions, that's Mercury, perceptions, my own mind, I think I saw myself as, or that is where in my own mind I was playing out the role of the hero in my life. But that whole structure didn't work. My whole life collapsed. It was not the right structure for me, or it carried me through a certain point, and it wasn't going to carry me any further. So I think that's interesting to think about when we think about Saturn and Capricorn, the sign that it rules, or one of the signs that it rules. It's this idea of whose mountain are we climbing, and if you get to the top of a mountain you've climbed and it wasn't your mountain, you end up isolated and alone. And there is a sextile between Saturn and Pluto in this chart, and for a while it's been that way. And Pluto is the idea of the rug being pulled out from under you. So the structures collapsing, the internal structures, or the structures you internalized from society that weren't right for you, those will fall out from under you, and the experience part of what may make that happen is the experience of being at the top of the mountain and feeling isolated and alone and feeling like the joke's on you and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, that was a little bit more of a diversion than I wanted to take. But the idea of the dying, the heroic, the dying of the heroic age, that was a theme that came through, and it feels like the energy in this chart is sort of pointing to that we really are at a point where we're transitioning. Our perceptions are going to start waking up to this experience. And so let's just talk about this a little bit more specifically right now. So Mercury here at 15 degrees of Leo, this is where it turns retrograde. So at 15 degrees of Leo, this is a transition point between the between the first quarter phase, that's here. It starts at 0 degrees of Cancer and goes here. This is a yang phase. And then this at 15 degrees Leo begins the gibbous phase, and this is a yin phase. So in the first quarter phase, we're emerging into new stages of being, the archetype of that being the birth of the newborn baby. But on some level throughout our lives, we emerge into new stages of being, and we need the caring and the support and the nurturance to help us to be able to build to that, so that that can happen, and then to support us when we come into that new stage of development. So that's one of the ways that I think about in terms of Cancer. And then in the first part of Leo, we're maybe exploring, we're play acting, we're kind of exploring all the emotional experiences that we had here, Cancer emotion, and for the purpose perhaps of choosing a role. In the case of this chart, I'd say yes, that, in specifically because Saturn is sesquiquadrate Mercury in this chart. Sesquiquadrate is 135 degrees. Saturn has to do with this idea of roles. 135 degrees falls, when you count that on the wheel, falls at 15 degrees of Leo. And so this idea of play acting and roles, and the roles that as we play act when we're kids, perhaps to try on different roles to help us understand which ones align with us emotionally and allow us to channel our emotions in our lives in the ways that are most true for us, right? And so the question is, are we tuning into ourselves as we're play acting? Those roles are externally assigned. We see them out in the world. And the question is, are we tuning into ourselves to what feels like, or are we what feels right, or are we tuning to what's outside of us to determine what's approved of or esteemed or whatever? And so we go through this process of picking and choosing and aligning or not when in this first part of Leo. And then at the peak, this is, maybe we can think of this as the discovery point, the aha point. This is who I am. This is the role I want to play. And then we move into the second half, and then it's about internalizing that, integrating that, our relationship with that. And then in Virgo, we learn the skill of it. So I'm not fully clear about what this integration is, but it's the idea of integrating the light. Instead of expressing our light outward, dramatizing our light outward, it's more about integrating our light inward so that it can be brought into service with Virgo, through skill development and that sort of thing. So this idea that we get to this peak point, but we're turning back. And so perhaps this peak point is the old perceptions based on the old structures of the hero and the victim, and the heroic, the savior, that sort of thing. And perhaps it's sort of like, wait a minute, maybe this isn't quite right anymore. Maybe this isn't the right perceptual structure anymore. Maybe this isn't the right mind patterning anymore. Maybe we need to go back and do those roles over again and try those over again. Maybe we chose the wrong thing. And we need to think about that, and before we go forward. And when we go forward, that's stepping into what I like to think of as a new stage of development relative to the planet. And so we can think of in terms of a new mind structure. And so again, the template that I'm thinking about there is this idea of the age of the heroic and the dying of the age of the heroic, and how that shapes our mind and our perceptions and what we choose, and the roles that we play in life. So I'll leave that there for now, and I'll probably come back to it. So then the other idea that came through for me, it was more of an image, and that is the idea of a waterfall thawing in the springtime. So I lived in Minneapolis, Minnesota for a long time, and I lived not far, for a period of time, I lived not far from Minnehaha Falls, and I would walk with my dog there throughout the year. And when the winter was turning to spring, so in the winter the falls would freeze, and then as winter turned to spring they would start to thaw. And it was a really long, drawn out process, because winter is very deep in Minnesota, and so it takes time for that thaw to happen. And so it would start, you'd see the waterfall, and it would just maybe get a little bit of dripping of water, that sort of thing. And then after a time, maybe you'd see just a tiny bit of a chunk fall, like a little tiny piece fall off or something like that. And then that would go on for a while. And then eventually there would be this moment where this big, huge chunk would fall, like enormous chunk, like this monumental sort of thing. It would fall off, and then that would slowly happen, and even that would just be this slowly happening thing, and you're just waiting for the water to be gushing, but it takes so much time. But there are a couple things there, so it takes time. So there's a process that happens, and it's inevitable. The waterfall is going to thaw, but it can only happen in its time. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that it can't not happen. It's going to happen. So this ties in with the idea of the dying of the age of the heroic, that this old age, it's only a matter of time. We all know we're in this shift, this huge shift in terms of humanity. And part of that shift involves, I think, a mind shift. And the way that I'm framing that is the idea of the dying of the age of the heroic being the old mind pattern, and moving into a different mind pattern. That perhaps, I would argue that the structures that we've created give rise to the crises that require the heroic, and we could potentially create structures that don't give rise to that. There will always be times, always be a need for people, there will always be times when we need help. I'm not saying that, but it seems to me we've created structures that bias towards the need for victims and saviors. And perhaps we can create different structures that instead are about helping us all realize our potentials, and in helping us do that, there's less of a need for the victim savior thing, except as incidentally as we're living our lives, but the structure isn't necessarily going to create it or cause it to happen, if that makes sense. So the idea of the age of the heroic being the thing that it's inevitable that's going to come to an end, that we're in the process of that right now, of that quote unquote thawing, of this thawing process happening. If you think about the age we've been in, the need for the age of the heroic, thawing is actually a good description, because we've had to sort of armor ourselves, and we can think of the ice as the armor. We've had to armor ourselves from all the trauma that this pattern, these structures we've created, and the pattern that has arisen from them has created. So there is this kind of idea of this thawing happening right now. And Pluto, we've all been acutely aware of all of the old sort of detritus coming up from underneath, showing us the wounding and the harm that's been happening from this, and now it's surfacing so we can integrate it, and that process is maybe going to give rise to a different kind of structure that is not the age of the heroic, but something different. So that's maybe how those two themes come together. So these two themes of the idea of the dying of the age of the heroic, or the dying of the heroic age, and the thawing of the waterfall, the thawing of the old, this idea of this process that is inevitable, And that also takes time. And we can think of the time that it takes as a positive thing because it gives us all time to adapt to it. And then with that, the idea that the process can't, nature is going to have its final say. It can't be resisted. So if we put humans in there instead of a waterfall, the humans are going to try to resist change. Pluto and Saturn are in a sextile relationship. Pluto is resistance, and Saturn is sort of, can be stuckness, or structures that are just really like in place and not moving, that sort of thing. They can become rigidified. That's what I'm trying to say. So the rigidity itself can be the cause of the resistance. We can maybe think about it like that. But the resistance can't maintain, can't sustain. The process is bigger than that, and it's going to happen. And I feel like this chart, this Mercury retrograde chart, is really speaking to this, and how it's maybe representing a significant shift in this process from the resistance to a moving into an acceptance. With Mercury retrograde going, the retrograde period going through perhaps our senses of the shapes of our mind in terms of what we've chosen, and starting to see things in a different way, and starting to choose different things around that. That's the best that I can say it. I hope that made sense. So if we go and just to emphasize also about a lot of the Capricorn theme that I'm talking about, we did have a Capricorn full moon on July 10th. So we are in the Capricorn waning part of this lunation cycle. It started with a Cancer new moon. And Cancer new moon is the Cancer is the birth of something new, the emergence of something new. And Capricorn are the structures that support that, but also the old structures. So we're in this Cancer lunation cycle, and particularly in the Capricorn waning phase of that. So it's all appropriate within that larger cycle. And so if we look at the Mercury retrograde, here we have Mercury retrograde. It's sunshine just after a storm. And this is an interesting thing, because let's look at the Six of Wands. That's the Sabian symbol. And this is this idea of a messenger bringing, this is riding in from a victory, or a messenger bringing a message of victory or something like that. And taken together, what came through for me was something a bit surprising perhaps, but the idea that the sunshine just after a storm, we can think of that as part of the old cycle of the warring and the struggle and the crisis and all that, and then the sunshine. And maybe the sunshine, it is helpful and it is warming and it is all that, but perhaps within the context of this cycle, kind of getting tired of having to go through the crisis and the struggle, to be able to see a moment of sunshine. And I'm not saying we don't go through challenges and that sort of thing. I'm not saying that's going to go away, but the extremes of it, in terms of literally it can be life or death and that sort of thing. And so what came through for me was the idea of this whole pattern, just being tired of it. So I'm sure a million other ways to read this, so I will be curious what comes through for you. But that is part of, I think, what gave rise to this idea of, or what came through. It wasn't even that I thought about it so much as it just was something that arose. I'm like, the dying of the age of the heroic. So Six of Wands, that's where Mercury turns retrograde, and that's another reason why I was thinking about the sunshine as perhaps, wait a minute, we're seeing the sunshine again, we're seeing this pattern playing out again and again. Is this really what we want? Do we really want to keep going through these battles and, the victory? Because with every victory, somebody is somebody is a failure, somebody is a loser. Do we really want that cycle? Is that really what we want to continue to pattern? So then, let's just minimize this. Mercury is going to retrograde back to about 4 degrees of Leo. And then it's going to go direct again. So the way that I think about that is that Mercury is turning back. It's this, what comes after 15 degrees is the new territory, the new birth, the new development for relative to this planet. And it's going to go back. It's something, it has to go back for something. For some reason, it's not quite ready. It needs to prepare. It needs, perhaps a foundation is missing or an insight is missing. Something isn't quite there. It needs to turn back. And that's represented by the direct point, in this case, 4 degrees of Leo. And so we can look at the Sabian symbol and the tarot card for that. So Mercury direct, 4 degrees of Leo. The Sabian symbol is rock formations at the edge of a precipice. And what came through from me there was the idea, I just got this idea of these rock formations being kind of precarious at the edge of a precipice and that they might fall away. And my understanding is that I remembered watching a video and they're saying that the cultures didn't, back in the day, like tribal cultures, didn't build under these rock formation precipices because they will sometimes fall away. And so the idea that the processes have come this far and they've shaped this certain thing, but that's going to fall away. So that's what I thought about when I saw the rock formations at the edge of a precipice. And then the 5 of Wands, what's that? Yeah, this is this idea of struggle and battle for the sake of it. Everyone's at odds with each other and it's just for the sake of it. And that's what other tarot card readers often talk about and how I've been interpreting it. If we look at what weight says, it feels a little bit different in a way. Well, let's just see. A posse of youths who are brandishing staves as if in sport or strife. So yeah, they're in training. That's a better way to think about it. They're in training for the culture that we have in place, that's in place right now. This is how we train for that. But this does not lead to cooperation, right? Like this is maybe not the kind of culture that the energy can support anymore, or even that we want anymore. Maybe we're just a little too tired of this. But you can think about them imagining themselves as heroes engaging in these mock battles, preparing for those battles they're going to have to save their communities, right, from the transgressors. So imitation, so meanings, imitation as, for example, sham fight, but also the strenuous competition and struggle of the search after riches and fortune. In this sense, it connects with the battle of life. Hence, some attributions say that it is a card of gold, gain, opulence. But that part, none of that makes sense to me in this context of this reading. What makes sense to me is the idea of this is the old training grounds. And these old training grounds are patterning something that no longer makes sense anymore. And the rock formation at the edge of the precipice is the old pattern, and it has evolved as far as it's going to evolve, and the next step is that it's going to fall away. That's the idea that comes through for me. And again, I'd be interested in what anybody else gets from this. And then the midpoint. Or the solar point that I like to call it, is when, in this case, Mercury will conjunct the Sun. And that happens at 9 degrees of Leo, and that's on July 31st. So the retrograde is July 18th, the direct point is August 11th, and the solar point will be July 31st. And that's early morning dew. And that just reminds me about, so if we think about what the solar point is, metaphorically, what I think it is a moment of clarity or crisis, but the crisis brings that moment of clarity. And the crisis or the clarity in this would be the early morning dew, and how that, if you think about that energy, that feeling of that early morning and that dew, it's refreshing, it's enlivening, it's there's something very holy about it. There is a sense of being loved and embraced by nature, by the universe. It's this wonderful, quiet, peaceful morning, and the dew is talking about, we're being nourished with everything we need, with the water and the nutrients within that. And then the Five of Wands, we already saw this. And this is, so the early morning dew is, in this case, the contrast with that. And that contrast might be what gives us the clarity that allows us, or allows the rock formation on a precipice in our own minds to start to fall away. That rock formation that is the conditioning of our own mind to finally maybe fall away. So if we look, let's see if I have anything more to say. There are two aspect patterns in this chart. Venus, they're both T-squares. One is Venus at the point of a T-square, the focal point of a T-square, and that is squaring Mars and the South Node on one side and the North Node on the other side. Venus has to do with our values. It's sextile Mercury, and Mercury rules Venus, or rules Gemini, so it's ruling Venus in this case. So Venus values is sort of taking its signals right now from Mercury, and so what Mercury sort of processes through as it goes retrograde will have an effect on our values and our sense of worth and our sense of well-being, you could say. Gemini has to do with our early environment, and as such it has something to do with our early conditioning, even though we think of Capricorn specifically and Saturn, its ruler, as conditioning. It's where we learn things. It's where we get our initial imprints. And so to the extent that those have shaped our values in ways that are out of alignment with who we really are, then perhaps Mercury's retrograde will be helping to give insight into that, and we will be able to perceive our values from a new perspective, and from a perspective that helps us understand, are they in alignment with who we are or not. Saturn, in that sesquiquadrate with Mercury in Aries, Aries being who I am. So the values shaping who we are, who we understand ourselves to be, to the extent that who we understand ourselves to be is in alignment with who we actually are, all good. To the extent that it's out of alignment, this may be an opportunity to become more aware of that, to see that more clearly. The square to Mars in the South Node, well, we can think about this as the pattern, the South Node being the pattern of warring that we've all been raised in. I mean, whether or not we embrace war or not, we're all raised in essentially war cultures, in terms of the psychology of the cultures. And so that's the old patterning. That's the old skill we developed. We learned how to brace. We learned, learned how to fight. We learned how to do all that kind of stuff. The North Node is in Pisces. Pisces is love and compassion. I mean, in its highest expression, that's what it is. It can also be deception and illusion. It could be ill health. It can be whole lots of things. But in the context of this reading, I would say it's about love and compassion. And the challenge, the ask, the crisis in regards to this T-square is letting go of the old and allowing ourselves to embrace, take in, accept, allow a new pattern to come in that's based on a whole different paradigm, a whole different way of being, I guess you could say. So then this other T-square has the moon and Chiron at the focal point, and it's opposing the sun it's not opposing, it's squaring the sun on one side and Pluto on the other. So the old ego structures wounded by trauma, Pluto in Aquarius, trauma, soul, at a soul level trauma. We've been doing this for a long time. It's literally traumatized souls. Moon, ego structures, Chiron, wounding, and also healing. So, and in Aries, ruled by Mars, Mars in Virgo, the anxiety and insecurity. Moon also has to do with this idea of insecurity that arises when we prioritize, when we pattern ourselves, or when the structures that we have in place are patterned on the idea of war, and war naturally giving rise to trauma, and trauma creating what do I want to call it, a fractured ego, or an insecure ego, or an ego that is very fragile. And so, and here we have the sun, our vitality, in Cancer, once again, and Cancer is ruled by the moon, so once again the idea of our ego structures. And if we have fragile ego structures, fractured ego structures, it's hard for our true light to shine through. And so the opportunity, obviously, is for healing of this, becoming more aware of this. And Pluto, as Pluto dredges things up from the underbelly about this trauma, we become more aware of it, and that gives us the agency, Aries agency, to be able to start healing that. And as we heal that, more of our true light can shine through, instead of kind of a distorted light, and a very hardened exterior, a hardened shell protecting us, because we're just so fragile inside. But if we can heal that inside, then we're no longer fragile. We're flexible. We're resilient, and we're more able to shine our light of love and compassion, and to live lives of love and compassion. Of course, and of course that's a work in progress. That's something we're all going to have to learn how to do, how to navigate that, how to express our assertion and will in different ways that are aligned with love and compassion, instead of valor and victory and heroism and honor in a negative sense. So I would say Leo has something to do with honor, Aries has something to do with honor. To the extent that honor has something to do with us against them, wanting to shift out of that to something different that's more about all of us, Aquarius, all of us, and also Pisces, all of us. So anyway, those are my thoughts on this. Let me know what you think. If you have any other thoughts or ideas, please feel free to share them. And with that, I think I'll end it. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope there was something helpful or inspiring for you. And if not, that's okay. Just leave it behind. Okay, take care. Bye.